In the vast panorama of military history, few figures shine as brightly as Napoleon Bonaparte. Yet, behind every great commander stands a cadre of men whose courage, loyalty, and tactical brilliance transform mere strategy into victory. These were Napoleon's marshals, the men who carried his orders across smoke filled battlefields, who turned abstract maneuvers into thunderous charges of cavalry and infantry. Their stories are woven into the very fabric of the Napoleonic Wars. Historians like David Chandler, in the campaigns of Napoleon, remind us that Napoleon's genius lay not only in his own brilliance, but in his ability to inspire and employ his marshals as extensions of his will to understand the rise and dominance of the French Empire. One must look at these marshals, their triumphs, their failures, and the blood soaked fields where they carved their names into history. Today, we'll journey through the lives of the most famous of them, from the daring cavalry charges of Murat to the unyielding tenacity of Ney, the iron discipline of Davout, and the meticulous cunning of Soult. Stay with me because the drama of these men's lives is as captivating as any epic ever told. But before we dive deeper into this battlefield of legends, if you're passionate about military history, strategy, and the great figures who shape the destiny of nations, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Here at Vertex of Time, we bring you the hidden truths and the epic sagas of the past, stories that textbooks often leave behind. Join the ranks of history enthusiasts from around the world and march with us through the centuries of war, honor, and power. The first marshal we must speak of is Michel Ney, often called the bravest of the brave. Ney embodied raw courage, leading charges personally, his red hair visible in the thick of battle. He distinguished himself during the Battle of Friedland in 1807, where his relentless assaults helped break the Russian army. Historian Andrew Roberts, in Napoleon, A Life, describes Ney's style as a fury of courage, sometimes reckless, but often the very fire that ignited French victory. At Borodino in 1812, Ney led attacks under withering Russian fire, his men calling him the Lion. During the infamous retreat from Moscow, Ney covered the rear guard, refusing to abandon his soldiers, firing the last cannon shot himself before retreating across frozen wastelands. It was Ney who stood last on Russian soil, a figure of sheer defiance against impossible odds. Then there was Joachim Murat, flamboyant, fearless, and perhaps the greatest cavalry commander Europe had ever seen. Murat rode into battle adorned with plumes and gold, a vision that inspired his men and terrified his enemies. His leadership at the Battle of Eylau in 1807 remains legendary. Murat commanded a cavalry charge of over 10,000 horsemen, thundering across snow and cannon fire to smash through Russian lines. Chandler describes this moment as a spectacle of cavalry unmatched in modern warfare. Though Murat's vanity sometimes overshadowed his judgment, his brilliance in battle was undeniable. Later crowned king of Naples, Murat's fate would end in tragedy, but his reputation as the embodiment of Napoleonic cavalry lives on. Another indispensable figure was Louis Nicholas Davout, known as the Iron Marshal. Where Ney was fiery and Murat flamboyant, Davout was disciplined, cold, and ruthlessly effective. His greatest triumph came at the Battle of Aoust in 1806. Outnumbered 2-1 by the Prussian army, Davout's corps of 26,000 men defeated over 60,000 Prussians in a stunning victory. Historian John Elting notes in Swords Around a Throne that Davout was perhaps the only marshal who could rival Napoleon himself in command. His strict discipline made him unpopular among his men, yet they respected him deeply, knowing that under Davout they would never be led to pointless slaughter. Unlike many of his peers, Davout remained loyal to Napoleon until the very end, refusing to betray his emperor even when others wavered. Next, we come to Jean de Dieu Soult. Nicknamed the strategist, Soult excelled at both battlefield tactics and the art of administration. His command in Spain during the Peninsular War showcased his skills. though he faced the indomitable Duke of Wellington. At Oporto in 1809, Soult orchestrated a brilliant defense before being forced to withdraw. Yet his most significant contributions came during Napoleon's return in the Hundred Days. Soult served as chief of staff at Waterloo, though his performance there remains debated. Historian David Gates, in The Spanish Ulcer, argues that Soult was a capable general, yet never quite able to shine in Napoleon's shadow. Still, Soult's career was long and distinguished, extending even into the restored monarchy. Equally famous was Jean Lannes, perhaps the marshal most personally beloved by Napoleon. Lannes, a man of humble origins, rose through sheer courage and brilliance. He fought like a bulldog, relentless and fierce. At the Battle of Montebello in 1800, he earned his marshal's baton by smashing Austrian forces with bold maneuvers. At Austerlitz, his corps clashed furiously with the Russians, holding the line long enough for Napoleon's decisive strike. But Lannes' end came tragically at Aspern-Essling in 1809, where he was struck by a cannonball that shattered his legs. Napoleon wept at his bedside, calling him the most courageous man I have ever known. Then there was Ender Masséna, known as the dear child of victory. Masséna was one of Napoleon's earliest and most trusted marshals, instrumental in the Italian campaigns. His defense at the Battle of Zurich in 1799 against the Russians and Austrians secured France's hold on Switzerland. At Wagram in 1809, despite being injured, Masséna commanded with brilliance, executing crucial maneuvers that secured French success. Yet his later years were marked by decline as greed and health issues eroded his effectiveness. Historian Philip Dwyer notes that Masséna's genius was undeniable, but he lacked the consistency and loyalty of men like Davout in telling these stories. One cannot forget Marmont, Oudinot, and MacDonald, each with moments of triumph and tragedy. Oudinot, famed for his wounds, was called the bayonet general for surviving countless injuries in battle. MacDonald at Wagram led a massive column that turned the tide. Marmont, though brilliant at times, ultimately betrayed Napoleon in 1814, a decision that would forever taint his name. The Marshals were not merely Napoleon's subordinates, they were fragments of his own genius, each embodying a facet of war, nay, the courage. Murat, the cavalry thunder. Davout, the discipline. Soult, the strategy. Lannes, the fury. Masséna, the instinct. Together, they made the French army a machine of conquest that reshaped Europe. As the empire crumbled after Waterloo, many marshals faced tragic ends. Ney was executed by firing squad, refusing a blindfold, shouting, "Vive l'Empereur." Murat was captured and shot after a failed attempt to reclaim Naples, dressed flamboyantly to the last. Others, like Davout, lived in quiet dignity, their loyalty unbroken. Their fates mirrored the destiny of Napoleon himself: glory, downfall, and the immortal mark of legend. And so, when we look back at the Napoleonic Wars, we must remember not just the emperor on his horse, but the men who rode beside him, who bled for him, who turned his dreams of empire into reality. In their bravery and flaws, their victories and betrayals, we see the full spectrum of human ambition on the battlefield. As historian Vincent Cronin wrote in Napoleon, the marshals were the thunder of his storms, the steel of his sword, the breath of his empire. Their names may rest in stone, but their echoes still roar across Austerlitz, Eylau, Borodino, and Waterloo. They remind us that history is not shaped by one man alone, but by those willing to follow him into fire. This was the age of Napoleon's marshals, an age of courage, glory, and ruin. And though the empire fell, their legends endure, immortal as the clash of sabers under a sky filled with smoke.